And now it is time for this edition of the News Review. In this edition of the News Review, Armenia's Prime Minister Nicole Pashinyan says he has reached an agreement with Russia and Azerbaijan to end the fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. Pashinyan says that he took the decision after a deep analysis of the military situation. However, he said the move had been, quote, unbelievably painful. The announcement sparked outrage in the Armenian capital, Yerevan. There, thousands gathered outside the government headquarters to call for Pashinyan's resignation. Groups of protesters also stormed the government headquarters and the parliament building. The ceasefire is being monitored by some 2,000 Russian peacekeepers. The Azerbaijani president says Turkey will also be involved in implementing the truce. 3 previous ceasefires failed to end the fighting between Azerbaijan and Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh. To discuss that further, we're joined by Mr. Freddie Weir, journalist and a political commentator from Moscow, and also Ahmad Shahidov, head of the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, live from Baku. So let's begin with Mr. Weir and see if he thinks that this truce, which is the 4th, if I'm not mistaken, will last. Mr. Weir.
Yes, I think we now see the outlines of a permanent settlement to this really unfortunate war. It seems that the outlines of the settlement are pretty much what diplomats have been calling for, I mean, the United Nations, OSCE, for almost 30 years. It involves returning all of the land occupied by Armenia during the previous war, the war 30 years ago, and giving some time to establish a new status in the Armenian-occupied territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is exactly what could have been settled diplomatically a long, long time ago. And it has now been settled by war. It's pretty clear that Armenia has lost this war, and they are going to have to accept that this kind of solution will be implemented. It seems that it's mainly Russia that has stepped up and crafted this settlement, and Russian peacekeeping troops will go in to make sure that the peace is held in Nagorno-Karabakh and the Lachian corridor, and to ensure that some follow-on negotiations will happen to determine the final status for Nagorno-Karabakh. All in all, I mean, it's tragic that it came at such a human cost, and that it is something that diplomacy could have resolved a long time ago. It's a lesson to everybody. And we must hope that this will stick and that will kind of implement settlement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weir. Let's turn to our guest from Baku. Are you optimistic, or at least as optimistic as Mr. Weir, that this time around the ceasefire will last?
Yes, greetings from Gakh region of Azerbaijan. As you mentioned, the long-running Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has reached its logical end today, and the war is over already, and the requirements of the international law have been met. And over the past 45 days, Azerbaijan has exercised its sovereign right to conduct successful military operations, primarily to protect its civilians and liberate its occupied territories. And a peace agreement was signed today with the mediation of Russia, and a ceasefire came into force between the Armenia and Azerbaijan. Today's agreement is primarily aimed at establishing long-term peace in Nagorno-Karabakh region, and Russia was expected to play a significant role in this conflict. I think that Turkey will also take part in future talks, in future negotiations between the conflicting sides. And what about this agreement? This agreement was the realization of the conditions set by Azerbaijan for many years, but unfortunately Armenia used to ignore international law and refused to start peace talks. And finally, today, the government of Armenian government, in particular Nicole Pashinyan, was forced to accept the realities. After that, protests against the Nicole Pashinyan began in Armenia, and the Armenian people are preparing to overthrow Pashinyan from the power. I think that the end of government in Armenia that has ignored international law for many years and deceived not only the Armenian public, also the international community, has come. And as you know, Azerbaijan has been supporter of peace for the last 30 years and has worked for peace in the region and implementation.
Mr. Shahidov, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, and I would like to point to something that you also mentioned in your remarks. You did say that Pashinyan was forced to accept the realities. And also, we do have a word that Pashinyan has said he made this decision because of the military situation on the ground. Do you believe that Pashinyan was forced to agree because militarily they were not able to make the gains they were expecting?
Yeah, sure. Because last 3 years, when after the Nicole Pashinyan came to power, they deliberately violated the ceasefire, violated the norms of international norms and principles, the basic principles that reached between Armenia and Azerbaijan by the mediation of OSCE Minsk group, and violated the ceasefire, fired on Azerbaijani village. And every time Armenian authorities, Nicole Pashinyan, said that, as you remember, his very famous statement about that Karabakh is Armenia. It means that Armenia didn't recognize any international norm and principles. But when the clashes started on Sunday, September 27, during these 45 days, Azerbaijan launched very successful military operations and launched counter-offensive military operations in Nagorno-Karabakh. And after regaining the Shusha city 2 days ago, you know, Shusha is a very important city in Nagorno-Karabakh. The country that get access to Shusha, it means that won this war. So after regaining the Shusha, Armenian army has been destroyed already. So Pashinyan forced to admit the realities, admit the defeats on battleground. I want to underline that recent weeks, Armenian authorities, Armenian government, Nicole Pashinyan, make information blockade in Armenia and didn't inform about the constant defeats on battleground. So that is why today, after getting defeated on battleground and after signed this agreement with Azerbaijan and Russia, Armenian people were surprised what's going on, why you lied during these weeks. So I think Nicole Pashinyan finally admit the realities and admit the defeats on battleground and forced to sign this agreement. I think the protest action will continue in Armenia. In a couple of days, the Nicole Pashinyan will be overthrown from the power. But anyway, this agreement is the next victory of Azerbaijani side. Finally, the requirements of international law is being implemented, and after getting much part of its territories from Armenian occupation, now these in 15 days, the another 3 regions, Laçın, Ağdam, and Kalbajar, will be returned to Azerbaijan. So it means that Azerbaijan is country that won this war.
Thank you very much, sir. Let's go back to Moscow and talk to Mr. Weir. Do you believe that this spells the end for Nicole Pashinyan?
Well, it might well do. It should be pointed out that he's not specifically to blame. He owns it because he's the leader of Armenia right now. But this is 30 years in the making. It's been Armenian stubbornness over all the territories they've occupied and refusal to negotiate, even though the entire international community was urging them to do so, including and especially Russia. They never did, as your other guest has pointed out. They were stubborn, thought that their victory in the previous war could be made permanent, and they had many, many warnings that this would happen. So it is an accumulated mistake of Armenian leadership over 30 years, and now it has resulted in what is undoubtedly a serious military defeat. Let's hope now that Russia can insert peacekeeping troops, maintain the peace, that the borders of the territories will shift in a direction that restore justice, and Armenia and Azerbaijan will get its rightful territories back, and that over some time we'll come to a solution for the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh itself, the former Soviet autonomous oblast, and it does have an Armenian character. It should be preserved. Their rights should be respected, but that is a matter for future negotiations.
Thank you very much to Mr. Weir. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have. Our guest, Mr. Weir, journalist and political commentator from Moscow, and Mr. Ahmad Shahidov, head of the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Thanks to both of you, gentlemen, for taking part in this edition of the News Review, and thanks to all of our viewers for following us.